This daily drawing exercise subject is an old brass lamp. I think originally it was actually a gas lamp, but has at some stage been adapted to take electricity. So in some ways it's relatively simple, but in other ways there's a fair amount of complexity in it as well. So I start rather obviously with the shade, and I'm trying to see these three sections across the lampshade as separate shapes that are joined together, because I'm not confident that it's going to be more accurate to draw it as one item, one shape, and then put the two dividing lines in. However, I make that line just a little bit too angled. Should have been more like that line. However, I decide to leave it, that I can live with it, and now just add some lines for this braiding that's along the bottom. And I don't know, why did I do that? I look at that and think, why did I put that line in that place? However, in the end, it encouraged me to cover it up by putting the floral pattern on the lampshade. So it turned out to be a good thing and to have a happy conclusion. So now there's the fringing, and I was trying to avoid doing just line for the fringing, but in the end, I think it actually turned out to be the best way to represent what we're looking at. And I'm trying to look to see, just from this angle, where the lowest point is in terms of the width of each of these three sections, because it's not exactly in the center for any of them, because we're not looking at this lamp straight on. It's very important to just get those things clear in our head when we first see a subject of this, which is almost straight on. Because if it is almost straight on, then the two sides are going to be symmetrical to the center, but otherwise, as in this case, not. So now I'm trying to position the lamp base, this short pole that we have here, and it has a series of steps out and then in again. And so I'm trying to draw them as stacked shapes, but there is a fair bit to do, and it's easy at this point for them not to end up being symmetrical to the center line, because there is actually no center line here. So there is a little bit wobbly. And of course, with these curves, the perspective theory tells us that as they go down below eye level, which is up towards the very top of the lampshade, as these curves go down below eye level, they become rounder and rounder. And so particularly when we get to the base, they become fuller and fuller in their curvature. And I've realized that I've drawn larger than the reference photo and that I'm running out of space. So I have a little adjustment with the camera and the tape, and then I go back to it. So it's interesting as I come down doing the base here, because I'm often talking about we need to draw what we see, not what we think we see. And I was very aware in my mind, that point I just said, that as these curves now get further down away from eye level, higher up in the picture, they become rounder and rounder. And I was so focused on that, I actually made them rounder than they should have been. And so in effect, I've distorted the perspective effect. Now, that's the sort of error that if you're going to make, it's probably one that the drawing can live with. However, in a demonstration drawing, it's not a great one to make. So I use it to demonstrate the fact that we really have to observe carefully, and we really have to draw what we see, not what we think we're seeing. And even when what we think we're seeing is because we're thinking about the perspective rules too much, that in the end, we shouldn't let that distract us from what we're actually seeing. Understanding the theory of perspective should help us to see more clearly what's happening, but we have to have our focus still in the end, before we put our pen on paper, of what we're seeing, not the theory. And so there is a pattern embossed in the brass around the base. So I do that, and then there is a wooden platform that the brass sits on. And my very final curved lines down the bottom become a little bit bodgy. So I use the fact that the wood is a darker colour, and therefore I can put some hatching on it to create some value to represent the colour, to in effect darken that section of the drawing. I can do that to hide the fact that I've now put, and I'm going to put a few more lines to get a better curve on the bottom. So sometimes there are opportunities to improve our drawing if we can just see them. And quite frankly, if it hadn't been a darker colour in the reference, it still could have been a quite happy solution to hide in some lines that make the bottom of the lamp look more accurate, because those final lines are silhouette lines, and so they stand out a whole lot more than most of the lines in the drawing. And so they're the ones that we really do want to have look accurate, to have look, if you like, visually comfortable in our drawing. So I use that hatching to let me add just a few more lines to, in my mind, create a rounder, fuller curve, which does in the end, of course, exaggerate the curve even more, but I think it's consistent with the curves I've already drawn. So now I'm looking at this and thinking, well, what more is there to do? Looking up at that line on the shade. And now I'm thinking, oh, I could have edited that bit of time out. So thinking, what can I do? So now I'm looking to see where the pattern goes over that line and trying to work out exactly what the pattern is. And there's a bunch of flowers here, and then there are some sprays of leaves and buds that go over the rest of it. So I'm trying to capture the feel, the effect of the pattern. I'm not trying to draw it too exactly, but this is the sort of place where it's helpful if we can observe to any degree how the pattern is distorted by the angle that the surface is to us as the viewer. So this center panel is more or less straight at us. So anything we draw there is going to look pretty much as if it were on a piece of paper in front of us. But on each side, those panels actually move away at an angle. And so the drawing is going to be distorted. It's going to be foreshortened as it moves away, and distorted in a greater way the further away it gets. And so the right-hand side is going to have more distortion than the left-hand side. Now, not every pattern is going to be as affected as noticeably as every other pattern, but it's something to be very much aware of, because we don't want any patterning we put on the fabric on the lampshade to fight against the perspective on the lampshade. We don't want the sides to look from the pattern as if they're parallel to us, and yet from the positioning of the lampshade, we know they're not. So I work with this and now try to indicate some foreshortening, some compressing of the design the further to the right we go in this last panel. And then there's just a few more little bits to do up the top. And while I can see, looking at the reference, that I have exaggerated the perspective curvature at the base, I think it's a happy enough conclusion for a quick 10-minute daily drawing exercise. Why don't you give it a go? Of course, you'll find this drawing on my channel community page. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I really do hope you do have a go at this. Although it looks simple, the symmetry and some of the shapes that we have to draw really are quite challenging. And sometimes these simple symmetrical things are more difficult in practice than things that look more complex but are more irregular in their overall shape. So I do hope you have a go, because there are things we learn with this that will be very helpful in lots of things that we draw. But look, whatever you draw and however you draw in it, make sure you have fun. And I drew this, I just remembered, with a 0.2 millimeter pen, if that's of any interest to you. So whatever you draw, however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.